Hello and welcome back to the Best Places to Work Awards 2020, part of the GamesIndustry.biz live series of events. We are getting ever closer to the awards themselves. We have a ceremony at 4 p.m. and then the main ceremony at 4:30. So join us for that. We have another panel for you here first. It's on COVID-19 and how that's changing and how it will change the workplace for the video games business. To discuss that, we have a panel for you led by GamesIndustry.biz Editor-in-Chief Matthew Handrahan. So over to you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Chris. As he says, I'm Matt Handrahan, the Editor-in-Chief GamesIndustry.biz. I'll be the host, somewhat more low energy than Chris. I can't match that effervescence that he brings to it. But I'm joined by a pretty expert panel of people today to discuss a very important subject. I'd like to do very brief introductions to them myself, but I actually want to throw it over to them to introduce themselves properly. So joining me today, we have Emma Thompson from Unit 2 Games. We have Kate Lindsay from Splash Damage. We have David Bowman from Creative Assembly. This is a really interesting topic for me, I think. I mean, we run these events a lot, and very often you're addressing niches of the audience, but COVID-19 is something that has touched everybody, like all over the world, every single industry. And so we have an opportunity to talk about something today that nobody who's watching will find irrelevant to them, right? And that companies large and small, every single job description you have, this is relevant to you. But first of all, I'd like you to kind of talk about, first of all, what you do, company you work for, also what kind of company that is, how big they are, how many offices, that kind of thing, just so people can get an impression of the perspective you're bringing to this discussion. So Emma, perhaps we can start with you.
Yes, I feel terrible that I'm not in a living room, unfortunately. I am actually, as you can see, in the office. So yes, there are a couple of us in the office at the moment. We are based in Leamington Spa in the Midlands, and we have 40 employees. And so there is just one office. However, our game is out there on Stadia, so we've got quite a global community that we interact with.
Okay, how about Kate? We'll go with you next.
Hey, I'm Kate Lindsay. I'm the head of HR at Splash Damage. We're a 300-person studio based in Bromley, in South London, and we released Gears Tactics this year, and we've worked on Gears 5, Halo the Master Chief Collection, and we're just about to launch Outcasters on Stadia as well.
I'm a big fan of Gears Tactics particularly, so good work on that one. David, perhaps we can finish up with you, just a little bit of colour on Creative Assembly. I mean, it's a name we all know, but kind of the size, the scale of it.
Sure. I'm the Studio Development Director at Creative Assembly. Creative Assembly's been in existence for 33 years. We're located in Horsham. We have offices in Sofia, Bulgaria, and right now we're all working entirely remotely, and there's over 700 employees. I think we're about 735 right now.
Yeah. So I think this is actually, to be honest, just right here we have an interesting contrast, right? You know, we have companies that are open, we have companies that are closed, and I actually think we'll wait till later, but it'd be interesting to get into the reasons why that is, whether it's related to the nature of your companies themselves. I think really we should be talking about the here and now and the future, because Lord knows I'm tired of talking about the last 6 months of COVID, but I do think we really need to kind of at least touch on it first. And I guess I want to, just to set the scene, want to go back to like the very, very first, the early days of the lockdown, and just try and identify the most immediate things that are challenged by the lockdown conditions. So like to get us started, like what ultimately, looking back now, what were the job roles, the kinds of jobs that were most challenging to set up as work from home, to work remotely? And David, let's start with you. You're nodding your head there.
Yeah, well, so we had already started a work from home test just before the new year. This was not related to COVID because we weren't future viewing people who could predict the future, but we said, hey, we as a company want to be more flexible and allow people to work from home anyway. So we ran a test on that, and we're finding some success and some problems. And so looking at quality assurance specifically, how do we get quality assurance people to be able to download and move the large amounts of data that they need in order to be able to test, have access to in some cases, multiple machines, So QA was dramatically impacted first, and then the other major impact discipline-wise was artists, making sure artists had access at home to the equipment that they needed in order to be effective, to be able to parallel what we had in the office. So those are the two roles that were probably the first most difficult to effectively make work from home.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Kate, Lindsay, do you have any other job roles to add in on top of that you found difficulty with?
Yeah, I mean, back to today's point, we did exactly the same thing. We were sort of already thinking about working from home prior to the actual lockdown, and we'd sort of moved our people slightly earlier than when the UK hit lockdown. So it was, but for us, it was a very much a rip the plaster off situation. We hadn't really explored working from home that much, apart from the few test cases that we've done. But in terms of role specific, I think audio is probably the most challenging for us, just in terms of equipment. Yeah, and just how are we going to replicate, that at home? But surprisingly, it's been great. I mean, there's been some teething problems. We've had less discipline issues, more like project issues. It depends on what project you're using and what kind of data you're transferring. But we've worked around it, and there's been all sorts of weird and wonderful things happening in the background between the ops teams. But we've just, IT particularly have really pushed through and got people set up ready to work from home as seamlessly as possible. But yeah, I say audio is probably our most challenging, for sure.
Interesting. Yeah, we definitely have heard stories of people really innovating to get functions like mocap working remotely from people's homes. It's been a difficult time all round. Well, actually, you know what? I think probably the thing, personally for myself, I find that the cultural aspect of it was probably more challenging than anything. So what aspects of company culture do you think were most tested by the lockdown period? Anybody?
I think with us, it was unfortunate timing for us because we'd actually had 2 years in the making of getting our game ready to launch on Stadia, which was a really big, exciting event that we were all waiting for, which was happening in July. And obviously this happened in March. So we were, as a team, obviously, because we're a fairly smallish team, there was that side of it. So we were all planning for that to happen. And then we all kind of got sort of separated as we had to sort of work remotely. Obviously, we had all the practical issues with IT and obviously moving equipment to people's houses and things like that. But for us, it was a real kind of shame because we were hoping to sort of run up to and have this big launch together and sort of be in the office and be part of it. But we kind of had to enjoy it sort of remotely, which wasn't quite the same. Yeah. But yeah.
I mean, so obviously, Unit 2 is a smaller operation than the other two panelists here have. But I wonder, Kate, do you think that affects the kind of the sense of well-being in employees remotely, like having fewer people in general in the company? Like, do you think that made a difference there?
In terms of well-being, did you say? Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess the more people you have, the more challenges you have. Generally, that's kind of how it goes. But it's how do you reach out to people personally and keep that personal touch? And I think remotely that presented loads of challenges. How you can't just walk to people's desks anymore. You can't cross people in the breakout room. So that aspect of the culture, and we did a really big well-being strategy last year. And how do we continue that remotely? You just want to land a pandemic on top of that. It was tricky, and I think just taking the time and still running with your well-being strategy, still understanding that this is like focus number one is your employees and their well-being and their mental health, and just making sure that stays top of your agenda, and transitioning that into remote working situation was key for us. And that things like we have an on-site counsellor, so keeping that going remotely. We have lots of things in place. So mental health first aiders, how do you train them to access their employees remotely? Same with the EAP, and just keeping the conversation going around that. That for us was like key to ensure that people felt looked after and were still communicating. And that's part of the culture altogether. 300 people. You can't personally reach out to everyone every single day, but there's things that you can put place in terms of your matrix to ensure that there's no cracks. And I think that's as long as you're doing that and you're making sure things aren't slipping through. That was a challenge, absolutely, and people were reacting to it very differently, and it's understanding individual needs and what support as an individual you need. It's not like a blanket quick fix. It's digging down and diving deep into those details.
Yeah, so I think certainly we'll be digging into some of the systems and structures that have to be in place now that we are, fingers crossed, looking at coming out of this and actually getting back into the workplace. But first of all, Emma, I mean, you are sat in an office. So what was the threshold that you crossed that made, I mean, first of all, give us an impression, how is the office being used at the moment? Like how many people at a time?
Well, we have a very, very small handful of people in the office, to be fair. I mean, a majority of our people are still working from home, and they're quite happy to do so. There was a couple of reasons why. I mean, from a facilities perspective, I mean, I look after the office as well as the HR. So from my perspective, it was important that when I was able to, I could come back and just check on the basics, like keeping up to date with things like the fire alarm systems and just making sure that, the building's still intact and everything's fine. So from that perspective, for me, it was fairly easy to make the decision to sort of keep coming back. But then over a period of time, we did find that certain people were finding it quite difficult to work from home, and if anything, their productivity was being slightly affected. And as Kate said, we the mental health and well-being of our staff is absolutely paramount, and has been, has always been anyway, but has been even more so recently. So for us, we did sort of say, look, if you are really struggling, there are things that we put in place in the office now that the people are allowed to go back to work. If they can come back to work, then we can facilitate that, which we did, and we did quite a lot of work around safeguarding and around sort of equipping the building really so that people could work safely. Health and safety is also a part of what I look after as well. So for me, it was sort of, fairly easy for me to put things in place. So a couple of people have started to come back full time, and the productivity for them has gotten better, and the mental health's gotten better, and we managed to work it really well sort of in the office. So.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because obviously you have two very distinct, you have the practical reality of going back to an office, and you have the emotional reality of the people that may or may not want to work there. And I think both of those things exist, right? But so, Kate, David, in terms of splash damage and creative assembly, much larger companies with larger offices, I mean, what is your view of, like, you're both at home, of when people are going to be phased back in, when people are going to start being used, and what are the thresholds that you need to reach for that?
Yeah, so for us, like exactly the same as what Emma just said. So we're due to reopen on the 20th of September, but basically it's on a voluntary basis. So exactly the same thing, those who are struggling at home, having productivity issues, mental well-being issues, and transitioning those people back. So we've got capacity for about 20% of staff. And I think we've only got a 5% uptake right now. Everyone is quite happy to work from home, and logistically, that makes sense for us to keep going in that way. We won't fully reopen the studio until next year, or depending on what happens. But for those who want to come back, the option will be there from the 28th. So exactly the same thing, looking at the safety, looking at the health aspect, and just making sure everyone's clear on those guidelines. So we've done sort of personal one-to-one calls just to ensure everyone understands the new ways, because it is a really massive change. You're not coming back to the fun culture where everyone's going to be there socializing. You're coming back to a desk with new rules, but that really helps some people, and that really works for some people, and we wanted to give people the opportunity to do that if they really need to.
Yeah, David, how are you handling it over where you are?
So we've got 3 buildings, 2 in Horsham and 1 over in Sophia. Everybody's been working 100% from home, except for the IT people who would visit the buildings to make sure things were continuing to operate as needed. In the past month, we've been doing surveys all along with our employees to find out how they were coping. We do one-to-ones, frequent one-to-ones, to find out how people are dealing, and if there were any issues that they had as far as productivity, needs, family, emotional support that was needed. And in those surveys, we found at first that people were quite willing to work from home. It was universally understood, and people were, feeling like, yes, we can make this work. There was a very small percentage who, because they had small places, family issues where the space was being needed by all members of the family, it just wasn't working well for them, and so they signed up basically to a short list of people who, as soon as we thought it was safe and we had enough information, we would be allowing them to come back into the office. So this last month, we've let a few people come back into the office. It's very different, as she was saying, that the environment's not the same, camaraderie, social experience that you have previously. Now it's much more. You're still social distanced. There's arrows that indicate where you should travel. The facilities are all disinfected frequently. Just the flow and the feel is very different. But there's physical space, and it's dedicated space to your work. So for people who didn't have that at home, we found that this is better for their mental health, and they're very, very happy being back in the offices already. But it's a very different experience. We're basically functioning entirely as a remote studio, just that some of the people are remote in the office now. And we don't intend to open again until we are sure that there's a safe and secure way to do so. So we're prepared to continue this indefinitely. Our effective productivity is quite high. So and we're launching games, and we've recruited another 100 people in the time since lockdown. So we're just operating as a company that's now fully remote. We will, as soon as we possibly can, get back together in our offices, because we do value that cultural connection that happens in the offices.
Yeah, but so with that in mind, I mean, because what we've heard mentioned here is that the office space themselves are quite different places right now. There are restrictions, there are sanitization requirements, which is fundamentally, and the way people move around spaces, how easily they can come together. They really have that's culture itself, right? So what I wonder is, you imagining that is just going to be the way it is for a long, long time to come? Do you actually think about whether or not the office space can ever go back to being that kind of fairly shared, easy going sort of environment?
So hard to imagine right now, isn't it? Like,
Yeah,
this
it
is just
is.
the new normal, isn't it? It's like, this is what it is. I can't anytime soon imagine that will change, and I think there's lots of things to happen before we get to that point.
Yep.
But it feels like, even though this is the new normal, people are really adapting to it well. On the whole, I think people, just accept this isn't targeted at people personally or individually. This is a global thing. So people are a lot more inclined to sort of follow those rules, because they know it's for the greater good. It's a shame, I think, to Emma's point, like launching games, and not having that cultural party thing. That is part of the games industry, is celebrating those successes and those wins. And I think that is hard, when you spent years and years building up to something, working really hard to get something out the door, and then you can't celebrate in the way you normally would. But I think most people understand why, and that most people understand that it's okay. We will hopefully get back to it at some point, and I think everyone has to have that hope. But they're just okay with it for now, because they know it's for a greater mission, I guess, in life right now.
I think one of the other things as well, which I think is interesting, is that I think it's made us remember as well that, we do have an obligation. Organisations have obligations to make sure that the health and safety of their staff is looked after. And I think, there are some practices that I've obviously had to implement because of the situation, that I think to myself, well, actually, I think this is a good practice anyway, that we probably really should have always considered. It's historic that if somebody in the office gets the flu or the cold, the entire office can go down with it. So maybe there are a few practices that I'm quite happy to sort of keep moving forward, especially the washing the hands and the make sure you're cleaning, communal areas down more often, and sort of being a little bit aware of how close proximity you are to somebody, especially if you've got a cold or a sniffle. Those sort of things are good to sort of keep on going anyway, I think. So
yeah. David, you were about to chime in with something there.
Well, I just wanted to say that going forward, we're going to allow employees more flexibility about to and fro from the office, but the office is the center of the collaborative nature of what we do. So we're redefining that space. We're going to envision new ways to organize that space, but we want to have a place that is a safe and effective place that people want to come to. So if we can get the spaces organized around that collaborative nature of what we do and get the environment to be a desirable place to be, then we believe giving people the option, come to the office when it makes sense for your team, for you, and for your project, then that would be the ideal. That would be what we would want to have as the perfect option. Where the vast majority of people are coming to the office at a regular basis because it's the place to get the work done in the way they want to get it done. But when they need to, they have the option to be able to work from home or work remotely.
Yeah. So I'd like to actually jump in with what I think is actually quite a big question here. Is that, does fully remote work actually make sense for the game development process, particularly in sort of companies of size? I mean, lots and lots of very, very small studios, 5 to 6 people can all work remotely, but in companies of size, dozens of employees, hundreds of employees, I think this is a question everybody's thinking about, having worked remotely for so long. Does it actually make sense for game development in the long term, or do you need that office space? And David, you were just saying you still want the office to be like a central hub for what you do. I mean, do you need that in place?
I believe so. As a game developer myself, somebody who's actually made and shipped games, the collaborative creation phase of the game, creating a game is so moment to moment and inspirational, and it's hard to do in this window-based thing that we're experiencing right now. It's hard for us to interact in a truly social way. We're not getting the relaxed social interaction, and it's hard to make this effective and fluid and to really magnify each other's efforts. This sort of further compartmentalizes this form of interaction. And maybe we can develop better tools to do this, and I think we're already seeing improvements in our social communication tools online. But there's something about us as human beings that we work really, really well when we're taking these social cues and working together in a common space. So I think there will always be a need in game development, especially at scale, for teams to be able to get together and communicate and feel a union and part, being together as part of the process. When you're in full production and you're just working on shipping the game, that phase might be able to be more remote than the early inspirational collaborative phases. It's difficult to know, but when you're closing out your game and you're trying to get it ready to ship, there's going to be a core group of people that in real time want to be able to interact effectively, and the tools aren't yet there to allow that without some reduction in efficiency.
Yeah, sure. Kate, would you say similar for splash damage? Like, it's not really, a lot of people talk about switching, everybody going remote full time, but actually it's more about just having much more flexibility going forward.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's that flexibility piece. I think like all in or all out is just not the answer. I think it's this fluidity that you can have of, working around, work and home life. But there are points in game making where you do need to be together. And it, we can all work from home. That's been proven, right? We all can do the job, but it's whether it's effective or it's what you really want out of game development. I think that's the question. I think it hasn't been answered yet. We're all doing it. We have been doing it for 7 months now. We know we can do it, but is it what people want? I think that's maybe slightly different. So I think having a studio is still a really good thing. And I think, bless all the new starters that have started in this weird, wonderful pandemic. They've been amazing, but, they've missed out on things that, we have history of and know from the studio that helped us collaborate along the way. Like onboarding someone, remotely is really challenging. I think having that opportunity to have some face-to-face interaction, understanding what the studio is and what the culture is, they don't have that yet. And I think that's where it's not saying they can't do their job. Of course they can do their job, but it's those extra sprinkles around, isn't it? That extraness that's missing, I think. So the studio brings that for people.
And it's fun. It's fun to make games. You know, it's fun. That's why we do it. We enjoy making games, and what part of it is that social interaction. So that's harder to do now.
I think Kate's just touched on something as well. You know, not everybody wants to. That's the thing. You know, if you've got an organisation that suddenly says, right, we're all going to suddenly go work remotely from home and that's it, you know, you might have a percentage of your guys that think, okay, yeah, that's great, you know, we're all for that, but then you're going to have a percentage of your employees that think that's the worst possible thing that could ever happen to me, and you know, that would be, you know, awful. Some people, you know, like you say, part of the creation process is being around other people and feeding off other people, and no technology in the world at the moment that we know can replicate that. So, you know, if we throw the baby out with the bathwater, I think that would be a real shame. So
and I want to actually touch a little bit. I want to move in some like practical tips in a second. We have got some questions building up as well, which is always good to see. But I just want to kind of pin you down, and I understand, obviously, you know, maybe some of your staff are watching this. You may not want to get into the specifics, but have you actually thought in like hard like numbers, processes about what that's going to look like? How many days in the office versus not? This new flexibility, like what that's actually going to be in real terms, like where people can be based, how often they have to be in the office. Have you landed on those things yet? And if you haven't, how are you kind of figuring it out? David, do you want to get started?
Sorry. So we've already announced to our staff that when we do return, that they will have the option of having 2 days every week out of the office. The teams, though, have to be able to stay coordinated. And as the head of production in the studio, you know, I know it impacts this discipline more than almost any other. How do you schedule and make sure that remains effective? So we announced it well in advance, so people can be thinking about how that'll impact their teams once the people start, you know, being the majority of time back in the office. So 2 days a week is where we're going to start, and once we figure out how to get this mixed environment working, because it's one thing to work entirely out of the office, entirely in the office, but when you're truly mixed, or like say 60% of your employees are in the office in that space, they tend to, if they don't have the discipline, they tend to forget those people who are out of the office. So, you know, we're going to start with 2 days a week, and then we'll transition from there. That's where we are right now. We have a firm level.
Kate, I think David just beat you to the punch there. Do you want to kind of chime in? Or
no, I completely agree with what David said. Although we haven't sort of said it's 2 days a week we'll be doing this, we're going to keep that a bit more flexible until near the time when we fully open the studio. But we have already communicated to staff that obviously we will look at all sorts of flexible options near the time to when the studio reopens, and people are starting to think about now like what that will look like for them. There are challenges though. I think David explained it really well. You know, it works now because we're remote, it works when we're in the studio, but what does that mixed hybrid situation look like? And I think that's, you know, we're yet to explore that, and doing this phase the week after next, I think that will be a good first step for us to understand how that will work, what the challenges are, and I think then we can just gradually phase it back in. But you know, we are going to work with our employees and see what their needs are, and try and be as flexible with and adaptable with them as we possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, Emma, obviously, you know, a Unit 2, you would want everyone together for shipping a game, right? But have you thought in detail about what that new normal is going to look like for you in terms of in the office versus out of the office?
I mean, we're very fortunate because we're, you know, a slightly smaller company. The communications between us all is a lot easier. But we are not in any rush to rush any plans through as to what we want to do. And I think, you know, as you know, the other guys have mentioned, you know, we are successfully and productively working from home. You know, we can prove that the technical side of it all works. That's not a problem. But for us, you know, that kind of cultural piece, we're looking at it kind of more organically. So, you know, and obviously then we've got to abide by what legislation sort of keeps coming through as well. So we're making sure that we're compliant as well. So we're basically, I know it probably sounds a bit cliche, but we are literally taking it day by day. The communications that we're having with, you know, our staff is all feeds into what we decide to do at the next stage, and then we'll communicate again and we'll evaluate, review, and then we move to the next stage. So we're kind of doing it very collaboratively.
Yeah, I actually want to kind of throw a statement in here that we've got from the YouTube chat. This is from Bex Richards. I think it kind of speaks to some of what we've been talking about, and I don't expect if you want to respond to this, obviously, but it's not a question; it's a statement. Bex says that office culture isn't the optimal quote fun environment that a lot of social extroverts think it is, particularly for neurodiverse people. She really hopes that this combination of both, the flexibility we're talking about, actually does become the new normal, that maybe this would be better in general to have that flexibility baked in. Again, if you want to respond to that, that's fine, but it's just a statement that I think Bex was putting out there. David, please.
So I believe I understand where that's coming from. Because for some people, the environment of an office is not the right experience. It's especially depending upon what they're doing in a particular moment in development. So we that flexibility, the ability as a company to say, no, you're an adult who is a professional who's really good at what you do, and as long as you can clearly understand what we're trying to do, you can help us decide what the best way of achieving that is. So for some people, that is, I need to be undistracted. I need to be able to focus. I need to be able to have 6 uninterrupted hours to build a paradigm in my head, act upon it in order to be really effective at what I do. And an open office environment is too distracting, too noisy. So for that person, we want to be able to provide the right opportunity to be able to work in the way that works best for them. It's hard to do at scale. Very, very difficult to do at large scale. So finding the way to be flexible, to maintain that flexibility of a smaller company at scale is exactly what we're focused on right now. We're trying to make sure that we become that we maintain our experience of small team going to big team, and then how do we do that across 3 buildings, and now how do we do it across national boundaries? This is the journey we're on: is how do we still feel like a small studio at large scale, and that's flexibility.
Sure. Yeah. I thought maybe we could move on to some more practical advice here. We've been talking a little bit about how to effectively communicate, remotely, digitally, the way we are doing now. Over the last 6 months, you've obviously had to tackle that exact issue. You've got teams that need to work within each other, collaborate across different teams. You need to cascade information down the chain of command. There's all different ways that companies need to communicate. Can you give, I don't want to be specific because I'd rather you kind of directed this, but what kind of tips, what effective practices have you found that allow you to communicate better in this way that we're doing now? Go for it.
I'll go if you want. So the first thing we started doing was having a daily email out to our staff. So between myself and our VP of people, we made sure a daily email went out that just captured beats of the day, hot topics. That could be about pandemic news, studio news, anything people related, whatever it was, just so everyone felt like someone was there. The studio just wasn't shut. There was actually humans around. So that's gone really well, and that's sort of developed into other things. The one thing that we made sure we were doing is that managers were having regular check-ins with their employees, and that's not just performance related stuff. That's real human conversations. Talk about well-being, talking how they're coping working from home. So we introduced through our performance management system a weekly well-being check-in, and it was really human. It wasn't forced, it wasn't mandatory, but it existed. So if employees wanted to use it, they could, and then it was the manager's responsibility to ensure those check-ins were happening. So we were helping support managers and employees through that process, and it just opened up a different level of communication between employees and their line managers. And it also opened doors up to speak to us and to more senior people to ensure that communication was happening around something that was personal to our employees. So
Sure.
for us, that they were really key things that we rolled out quite early on to ensure that people were still being heard. Their feelings were being listened to, but also that there were humans around and they weren't forgotten. Studio still existed. People just weren't sat in their living rooms or dining rooms, whatever they were doing, just staring at a screen. The company and its culture still existed, and those things were being relayed to them on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. David, would you have anything to add there, like effective communications tools that you've landed on
Yeah.
that have really helped this remote situation?
So one of the beneficial side effects of all of this was, at the scale we are, it's difficult to get all of the company in one location at the same time. So it's actually easier to have employees be able to access a single point of information to do broadcast. So weekly right now, Gareth, who's the head of our studio, has a Wednesday meeting with everybody where he presents what's the latest information from the company, and then we have sort of guest speaker slots where we bring in different parts of the company to talk about their projects. We've launched. How's that launch going? And so we spend an hour basically every week with this sort of company level communication going on. And that is very effective, and we're going to continue that no matter even if we were all able to come back to the studio at the same time. Right now, we would keep that as a really good best practice because it allows at scale everybody to attend and to ask questions and to be able to hear the latest news about the company. And then that goes down in scale for each of the projects. Similar once a week broadcasts within the team happen. And then the individual one-to-ones, we've made sure that we also had the regular one-to-ones before, which were more professional and centered on development and how people were doing. But we added a special, basically a more focus on how are people emotionally doing? What can we do to change their lives at home to make things better for them? And there's all sorts of social things that we've scheduled that we'll be keeping going forward. The weekly bingos, the quizzes, the social aspects that make life better in the pandemic would still make life better outside of the pandemic. Absolutely. So again, I think the more activities you add for your employees, the better. Period.
Yeah, I think it's something that we saw covering the pandemic that actually at first everyone was engaged with, like, how do we get practical information across the company in the ways it needs to flow? But actually, the much more pressing need was just to make sure people were okay. They felt supported. Yep. They felt connected to each other. Emma, obviously at Unit 2, you are a smaller organisation. There's fewer people overall. What kind of worked for you in terms of communication? What challenges did you face?
For us, it's actually, strangely enough, it's actually been really good in a way. From we're getting to know a lot more about each other than we probably would have never done had we been in the office. I mean, we have our general sort of structured communication. So we have our meetings in the mornings. We have a weekly town hall where we get all of the staff together and we talk about obviously general company information so we can share news with everybody. But we've also, alongside that, we've got our Slack channels, and we have channels for varying different topics. We've got pets, we've got shopping, we've got supporting each other with children and homeschooling, which we've all really supported each other with. So those sort of things have been amazing. And even, eventually on the town halls, we started to sort of encourage people to sort of, pop their kids on to say hi. And we've seen, people's cats and dogs and tortoises and all kinds of things that have come on, which has been lovely. So we've kind of really upped the level of conversations and the chats that we're all having. So if anything, we're probably communicating on a different level a lot more than we probably would have done had we just been passing each other in the office. So communication is something that we're really proud of. We've all managed to sort of really keep connected with each other as best we can, and as I say, have a little dip into each other's sort of home lives to see how we're all getting on. So
yeah, it's been interesting to look at people's kitchens and so on over the past 6 months. See what spices people have and so on. I mean, look, we have got a couple of questions, and I do want to get to those. I actually asked my team about what they were most interested in terms of the long-term effects of COVID, and this is one thing that came up a few times across the team, is whether or not, and I wonder what your thoughts are on this, that obviously now you have systems in place that allow for fully remote workers. Has this changed the way you look at how location applies to your companies, right? So your offices are in a specific place, but theoretically now you could hire someone anywhere on earth and they could work with you. Has your perspective on that changed at all? David, please go for that.
So we started an experiment to try to get people to be able to work more remotely because we think it's just a beneficial thing to do, and it opens up a talent pool that you wouldn't necessarily have if you are just recruiting to your local area. But there are, when you go internationally, there are time zone and tax issues. I'm talking with you right now from Victoria, Canada, and
nice.
that means I work from midnight until 10 a.m. here, local time, because I have to stay in the same time zone as the offices. So that's a challenge when you talk about this. That keep in mind it just because the employees are, you might have the technology to allow you to let people work remotely. There are also implications to it from a interaction and quality of life aspect. Again, I think it's the flexibility. It's like there are cases where it makes sense, and there's cases where it doesn't. Don't do global rules. Try to make them as flexible as possible, and the company benefits and the employee benefits.
Mm-hmm. Sure thing.
Yeah, I agree with David. We onboarded someone actually from Canada as well, not through choice, but because all the visa centres decided to shut down and stuck in Canada. So, we sent his equipment out, and he changed his hours to work in our time zone, but it was only a short-term thing. He was always going to relocate when it's safe to do it. He's actually coming next month now, which is really good. So it is thinking about long-term effects of that. I mean, within Europe, with a small time zone, it can work. I mean, there's things to consider in terms of benefits and contract status and tax issues. But we're prepared for that, and we've been doing that as and where we can or where it's necessary. But on a whole, it's not like it's not something we're doing all the time. But from a talent pool perspective, whilst we're in this situation, it is something we are flexing and leaning towards. But in the long run, we'll see. Right now, we're still in trial period, right? And it's all short term.
Yep.
Long term, I think we're going to have to see where it is. And I think, taking each situation as it comes, looking at individual circumstances and not just having a blanket response for everything. I think that's the thing that we've certainly changed and adapted, is just not having one rule for everyone. Like, let's look at it case by case. Let's look at what our options are here. Let's look at what works for the team and for the company at this point in time, and then seeing how it goes. And, just remaining flexible and adaptable, I think, is the way forward. But yeah, it is tough for people who aren't in the UK, as much as everyone's working from home, having those time zone issues and just like cultural differences, trying to onboard people anyway, remotely has been a challenge. It's really tough for them, but they've all been great. They've all just slotted in. But I think it will be different as and when we transition a bit more back to the studio, and I think it will be a lot easier for new starters to come into the studio and see what it's all about.
Yeah, I mean, Emma is because I think we'll finish on a question from the crowd, but like Emma, obviously Unit 2, again, we've said it before, but it's a smaller company. I mean, are you more inclined now to consider having fully remote staff to open up that talent pool that David was talking about?
I mean, to be honest, it's not really anything new for us. I mean, we've worked with lots of external partners and contractors that have all been in different parts of the world at any given moment, and they've all been very involved in the support with our creating our games. So for us, it's kind of nothing new, but probably not on this scale. We've probably never encountered it. So for us, all ours will be is just looking at it from a scalable perspective. We know it works anyway, and we're more than happy for any of our guys if they say, look, this works for me and we want to work remotely. Again, like Kate said, it's a case by case basis. If it's something that works and it's proven, like we're saying now, that we're changing our opinions. A lot of organisations are changing their opinions on people working from home, remote working. Then yeah, we're absolutely very pro for that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, so I mean, I'll alert Chris, who might cut in and shut us down any second, that we are going to have one more question after this. But I was actually thinking about what the new normal even means in application to this. But actually, the thing I'm getting is the new normal really just means flexibility, right? Like not taking it for granted that any one thing is normal anymore, that 5 days a week, all that stuff. Anyway, so quick as we can. So let me find it again. We have a question here, and actually it uses the word normal, so it looks like I planned it. Lockdown shows that a lot of people are more efficient, have a better work-life balance and mental health. working remotely. Plus, it's more inclusive. How do we shift the view from normal versus work from home to in office versus work from home? So I guess the idea there is that normal is no longer just they're equally important or equally relevant.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I
we're
think
doing it,
we're
right?
normalizing it. Yeah,
Yeah,
right now.
yeah,
Yeah, I
think
think
so
there's
too.
flaws and against. I don't think that, there are some people out that have been working from home that would probably disagree that it's been a
Yeah.
great work-life balance, especially when you've got children and you're trying to juggle homeschooling and you're trying to work
In hell.
remotely. It's very difficult. So I would probably argue for those that would say that working from home isn't necessarily a great thing for them, and they much prefer actually to be in the office around other people.
Sure.
I think
Yeah,
people
right now we've
like
gone to
this
the
mixed
extreme the
thing.
other way.
Mhm.
Yeah. So right now we're forced into this situation, and it's not right for everybody. And that's what we're all saying in one way or another, is that what's right for the individual is what we have to get to as an organization in order to take care of our people.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, like, I worked flexibly before pandemic. Like, I did flexible hours anyway. So for me, like, it was a mix of work from home. It's a mix of shorter hours in the studio, and I think it just, giving people what they individually need. Mine was based around childcare, and that was what was important to me as a person. It wasn't necessarily like what the studio wanted when they were applying, advertising for that role, but that's what worked for me, and they agreed to that situation because they knew they would get the best out of me during those hours rather than me trying to like do everything for everyone. And I think that's what we just need to remind ourselves of these situations. What works for that individual, and what is gonna bring their best selves to work, and that could be anything,
Yeah.
any
I
kind
mean,
of situation. We've just got to be open to it.
yeah, and actually, I think subtly that's actually an enormous shift in the way that people think about their employees, right? Like just that acceptance that everybody has slightly different circumstances. We've actually got to make sure that they're all accommodated and everybody can be happy. I think, well, we're already out of time. We finished up time 2 minutes ago. But thanks very much to my panel, to Emma, to Kate, to David. And I think Chris is going to come back in here now and kick us all out.
No, brilliant. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Matt. That's actually really good. And there's a lively debate in the YouTube chat. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's paying attention. Our awards kick off at 4 p.m. with the special Putting the G into Gaming award winner. And then the 2020 Best Place to Work award winners will be revealed at 4:30 p.m. You may have seen a certificate behind Emma's head there. So it's nearly time. That was last year's award certificate. However, we have an amazing session next. Last year's UK Best Boss winner, Siobhan Reddy, the studio director of Media Molecule, joins us for a special interview. She joined us a few weeks ago, in fact, and we recorded it, and we're just about to air it in 12 minutes. So go to live.gamesindustry.biz to watch it, or our YouTube channel, or just click on that link there in the YouTube chat. If you can see it, just click on that. Go on, join us. I'll see you in a few moments.